Welcome to Roots and Ruminants, your podcast for creative and innovative use of farm, pasture, and rangeland. We're going back to the basics of raising and grazing livestock, growing your own forage, and practical land use.
All right, welcome back, everybody. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Roots and Ruminants. I'm Justin Frichty, sitting down with Jared Knock, and today we've got a pretty darn special guest. We've got Will Harris from White Oak Pastures in Bluffton, Georgia, and I met Will at a solar agrivoltaics conference here a few weeks ago in Chicago, and he was nice enough to be willing to be on our podcast. So we are extremely excited. It's our first guest that has, made his presence on Joe Rogan, and Jared and I have talked about trying to get on Joe Rogan much times, but we've got a guest to be here. So Will is from Bluffton, Georgia, like I mentioned. He's a fourth-generation cattleman, born and raised at White Oak Pastures. And if you haven't searched up White Oak Pastures, you need to do it now while you listen to this podcast, because it's going to give you the scope of the operation. It's a sixth-generation family farm that raised 10 different species of livestock, eggs, organic vegetables, and hay on almost 5,000 acres. And so they've got quite the crew. If you go to their website, you're going to see just how extravagant it is. And you can buy anything there, and it's absolutely fantastic. So, Will, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and give us a little bit of history and context of the family farm there in Bluffton and how you got to the point where you're at right now, and then we'll keep going down that path.
Good, Justin. Thank you for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity. So I am Will Harris. I am the fourth generation of my family to operate this farm in Bluffton, Georgia. My great-grandfather started it in 1866, ran the farm all his life, followed by his son, my grandfather, followed by his son, my dad, followed by me. I'm being followed by two daughters who are in their 30s and their spouses. And those two fourth-generation members have got 5 babies who have not contributed yet, but we have high hopes. I guess the thing that would be, I hope would be interesting to you all, it's interesting to me, is how the first 2 generations of my farm, my great-grandfather and grandfather, ran the farm in a very vertically integrated manner. They raised a lot of different species of animals. They got up before day, 6 days a week, and slaughtered something. Something might have been a cow, might have been 2 or 3 hogs, might have been 200 chickens, but they slaughtered something, sheep or goats or what. They drove it on a mule-pulled wagon up 2 miles up the road to Bluffton. I'm sitting in Bluffton right now. And then more or less peddled the meat. They had places they stopped. This is pre-internal combustion engines, pre-air conditioning and food cooling, refrigeration, and pre-USDA inspection. And they ran the farm successfully that way for a couple of generations. My dad took over the farm post-World War II. He was born in 1920. And he was the generation who really modernized, industrialized, centralized, commoditized the farm. He moved it to a purely cattle operation and was successful with that. I followed him, and all I ever wanted to do was manage a monocultural industrial cattle operation just like my dad had. I went to the University of Georgia. My major in animal science, came back here and ran it very industrially for 20 more years under my watch. And in the mid-90s, I started moving away from it, and I've been moving further and further away from it ever since.
Mm-hmm. One of the things, had a chance to read your book or listen to an Audible, which is fantastic, and Will, you read it yourself, which I think is always is great when the authors read the audiobooks. It's a great read. A bold return to giving a damn. So it's a catchy title. If any of our listeners get a chance to get that downloaded or purchase that book, I highly recommend it. You kind of mentioned there, so Justin and I actually had a chance, we went to college together, we were college roommates, and in a large group of very livestock oriented peers that were going to animal science at South Dakota State University. And in the book there, you kind of explained that when you enrolled in the university, you enrolled in the animal husbandry program, and then by the time that you left, it had become the animal science program. correct?
It is, and, and I think that change is, it wasn't as abrupt as that makes it. That's what happened, but it was more gradual than that. The name change was sudden,
Mm-hmm.
but the change was immense. It moved from the livestock production program being a very cyclical business to a very linear business.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an incredible change. And it's one that my dad withstood post World War II. It's one that I started back the other way in the mid 90s. I should tell you that in the mid 90s, I didn't long for the production program of my great grandfather and grandfather. That's not the way that worked. I just became disenchanted with what I was doing, the excesses of the production model that I had embraced. So when I started moving away from that model, I was not trying to emulate my grandfather, great grandfather. I was just moving away from what I was doing. And at a point, I realized that that's exactly what I was doing. And I was moving back towards that model. It's not exactly the same. We've got a lot of other things to contend with, and a lot of other tools to use, but it was moving back in terms of the overall philosophy of managing the land and the animals.
Yeah.
Yeah, the talk about a cylindrical system versus a linear system, and I think that for some reason, well, if it's just industrialization of businesses that then comes to farms, that does move in a linear way, right? Like as far as efficiencies goes. And when we place a focus on efficiencies and profitabilities, you tend to focus on smaller micro things within that line versus taking everything into account, right? And so I appreciate your thoughts on that because it makes a lot of sense and it fits into what Jared and I talk about a lot, which finding this balance to have your whole farm be a system that feeds each enterprise. And you can insert enterprises in there that make others more efficient and more profitable. But it has to be that circle. It's not this straight line of just adding inputs to get to this end goal.
Yeah. I mean, so Justin and I, 10 or 12 years, we've worked with lots of different people, hundreds of thousands, not hundreds of thousands, but hundreds and thousands of people. And most every conversation is what more can we grow, right? What opportunities in your operation do we have a chance to grow, a cover crop after a primary crop, or can we double crop with 2 cover crops, or can we move to multiple species in this perennial planting instead of a single species? And it's almost every conversation is how can we further take advantage of the only thing free on the planet, which is the solar energy to make photosynthesis. And for the most part, 95% of those situations, that additional photosynthesis that we're capturing, it ends up in a forage, right? It ends up as either, going back into the soil as a soil health crop, or ideally in as an additional forage for grazing or stockpile feed. And so, for the last 10, 12 years, that's almost every conversation we have is what more can we grow?
Yeah. And it's what you do with what you grow. When my dad elected to only raise cattle, do away with the other species, just become a cattleman. My dad was cowboy and I was cowboy, so we didn't communicate real well. But I think that my sense is that he was very proud that he had become an expert cattleman. And he had. He was an expert cattleman, whereas his dad and granddad were generalists. They knew a little bit about a lot of different species and a lot of different things. I think my father was proud of that. And it's what it's what moved me to make me want to be an industrial cattleman just like him. I wanted to be that guy that knew all there was to know about that. But that had a great cost because you took yourself away from the food chain in its entirety and just occupied a space in the food chain. And that left us with a lot of economic vulnerability.
Yeah.
You were dependent upon the whoever's next, the feeder or the backgrounder, and ultimately the slaughter company, and ultimately the grocery. You just become a link in that chain. And while it allows you to have a great amount of knowledge in where you are, a lot of expertise, it brings a lot of vulnerability with it.
Yeah.
And we see that every day. Commodity farmers generally are not doing real well because they put themselves in a position in that linear chain where they can be crunched.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, despite calf prices being as high as they are, and that being such a big factor in total farm profitability, from a value standpoint, this will be the lowest year in the last 10 years for overall farm profitability nationwide, 2024. And the first half of the year, the prices were a lot better than they're going to be the second half of the year, right? So 2025 is outside of feeder calves. It's looking tight. It's looking tough. But we've outsourced the creation of markets, outside of us too. And it was really good when we had windfalls, commodity prices, core commodities had windfalls of a major export market in China, or they were building an ethanol plant every 60 days and things like that. That helped for a while, but I don't know what's going to save that system now. I don't know what comes in and makes that work again, because we're all geared up to produce something very similar to what everybody else is producing. And I'm not sure that there's any differentiating to it for the most part, or a new demand complex that's going to pull the main few crops out of the gutter.
Well, I think if we hadn't seen a pattern by now, we won't ever see it.
Yeah.
Since World War II, the farmer has gotten less and less and less of the food dollar, and I don't think that's going to get better.
Mm-hmm.
And we've turned it into such a linear, extractive business. When I was an industrial cattleman, I went to my pastures every day, actively looking for something to kill. I was looking for a plant species that I didn't want to be there, or a insect that I didn't want to be there, or a disease on the plants. I was looking for something to use a side on. Side means kill, homicide, kill people, insecticide, miticide, so on and on. And I think that when my dad started changing this farm after World War II and embracing that World War II technology to increase his production, I don't think there was any evil intent there. I think that was just using a technology that showed an immediate result, but the negative unintended consequence came much later, so you didn't recognize it. Whether it's chemical nitrogen burning up the organic matter in the soil, or whatever it is, it's just a delayed response.
Yeah.
So my dad's generation, my generation, got in the habit of embracing technology of what is the next product to use to protect my monoculture. We raise everything, industrially we raise everything in monocultures. And nature boils a monoculture. That's not cyclical.
Right.
So and I think that at a point, industry said, wow, we can get in the business of raising these sides that farmers will buy to kill the next problem. And the fact is, when we use those sides to kill the next problem, it does. They are highly efficacious. They work good. But it creates another problem. So it requires another side, and another one, and another one. And we've just reached a point that in that linear model, that we're spending more and more money on the crop. And the commodity system that we dump it into pays us less and less and less for the crop. And then the unintended consequences are burning up the organic matter in our soil, driving species of plants and animals and microbes into extinction, putting pesticides out in the environment. I mean, just on and on. We talk about the dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico. All these negative unintended consequences that this production model has given us. But it's darned hard to get out of it.
Yeah. So tell us about, so going back to the mid 90s. Oh, by the way, one more thing if I forget. I think it's about an hour and 20 minutes into the audiobook of your book there I was reading this week. And it was the perspective that I believe it was your grandpa and your father's, but the story about the only 3 types of capital that make any difference at all. The grass, the cattle, and the money, and the relationship of those. I think that's fantastic. Could you repeat that verbiage there, that old rule of thumb that you guys were using?
Yeah, my dad said there ain't but 3 things that matter. That's grass, cows, and money. Takes grass to grow cows, takes cows to get money. You can't have too much grass and too much money, but you can damn sure have too many cows. And he was guilty of that, and I am too. I always think my carrying capacity is about 10% higher than what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I run into this a lot. So work a lot with organizations on their sustainability work in beef cattle and that kind of stuff. And so you run into the group that just thinks that we shouldn't have any cattle at all, right? Or we have too many cattle already. It's like, well, we don't have enough cattle. There is some operations that have too many cattle, and there's a lot, way more of them that don't have near enough. But overall, we don't have near enough as a country, as a farming ecosystem in the United States, right? We just do not have them spread out enough into the right places at the right time, because the people that are really, really into cattle tend to stretch their carrying capacity to right where, and to beyond where maybe it should be. And then there's a whole lot of folks that don't have any cattle at all that needs some grazing.
It's incredible to me what the vegetarian vegan movement has done to the cattle industry, or what we have done to ourselves that they capitalized on. Mm-hmm. First of all, before I get into this, let me say I have full respect for the vegetarian or vegan lifestyle choice. If somebody chooses to not eat meat, I go to war to defend their right to do that. Mm-hmm. I have a problem with militant vegans and vegetarians, and they don't just want to say what they're going to eat, they want to say what I'm going to eat and everybody else is going to eat. And I got a problem with that. But those people have done a fantastic job of villainizing cattle. Mm-hmm. And it's ironic because we did it to ourselves. I mean, we're the ones that moved the cattle. My dad's generation and my generation, we moved the cattle off the grass, put them in the feedlot, started hauling corn to them. The environmental impact from the perspective of the soil, the water, the atmosphere, just all bad. But we did it. Mm-hmm. And those people now that want to take that militant position on it, lift that up as cattle are bad. Well, cattle are part of the ecosystem. They're not native to the United States, but buffalo were. And they have a vital role to play in the ecosystem, but we have villainized them, or we've allowed the militant vegan community to villainize them. And it's just not okay.
Yep. Yeah, it's from someone who, from an ethics standpoint, like I said, chooses not to eat meat. That's perfectly fine. The convincing others that they're doing it at consuming meat products at peril to human health, right, or to damage the environment. Those are we have not done a great job of combating those at all and showing different systems and right data. So one of the things, and I know we need to get back to, I want to get back to this in a little bit here, but we can start by framing this. So Jason Roundtree in a group did a large study at your farm And I don't know how many years it took to complete that study, but going back and look at prior soil records and the progress that you've made in soil organic matter, and basically said that your farm had sequestered enough carbon in the soil that you had restored from organic matter to basically take, even if we're playing the game of, yes, there's methane emissions and we don't, look at this, to completely wipe out any of the CO2 impact or methane impact that those cattle would have had over a 30 or 40 year time frame, correct?
Yeah, 3.5 pounds of carbon per pound of beef is what we sequester.
Mm-hmm.
That's their scientific figures. And by the way, Jason, who's a friend of mine, was the PhD, one of the PhDs on that project. But it was done by a company called Qantas from Minneapolis, Minnesota. And they were not here to report good things for the cattle industry. They were environmental engineers that were just focused on getting the numbers right.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I'm very grateful that work got done. But it's on my website, by the way. If you want to look at it, it's on whiteoakpastures.com. It's the Qantas ecological study.
Yeah. So tell us about that. That kind of prefaces that amount of carbon that you were able to increase in the soil through organic matter. Where was the average field or pasture starting out at from organic matter, or just soil quality overall? We don't need to, kind of get too hung up just on organic matter, but where were your soils starting at in the mid 90s when you made this transition? Where did you see the biggest change along the way, and what do they look like today?
Or where did your system start there is kind of what I'm looking back at too, right? Like you made this switch of coming back and understanding, you saw this end goal of where things needed to be. How did you reel that all the way back to your soil, your livestock, and then start?
Okay, so those are good questions. So let's just be very honest with you. When I started changing this farm, it had nothing to do with organic matter in the soil, right, carbon in the air. I just didn't like what I was doing anymore, so I changed it. But I did see not immediate, but an ongoing benefit to the way my land was performing. And I was not sharp enough to take starting levels of microbial populations and carbon. I didn't do it. But luckily, or unluckily, my neighbor was still farming the way I farmed. Mm-hmm. So when they did the study, the ecological study, we sampled the land that was beside mine that had been farmed the same way that I've been farming for 25 years. So we knew we had a good starting point. Mm-hmm. And then we were able to take land that I had owned managed for 3 years, 6 years, 9 years, whatever the numbers were. And at that, they plotted the improvement in organic matter. Now, you pointed out that organic matter is not all that matters. It is not. Mm-hmm. But it's a great indicator of soil health. And since you can't afford to measure everything, that was what Qantas decided to measure to map my improvement. Mm-hmm. Sure enough, from year 0 to year 20, whatever the numbers were, you can see it online, it was just a steady increase. I mean, there was a little bit of this, but pretty steady increase showing improvement. And I think it's still improving. And I'll say this, when I told you when I started making the change, I did not say, I believe I can build organic matter in this soil. That's not what happened. But I did early on have an appreciation that my land is getting better and better, and I like it, and this is what I'm going to do. And sure enough, when the results from the Qantas trial came back, I certainly didn't know what it was going to say, but I wasn't the least bit surprised. And I would have been shocked if it hadn't shown a lot of improvement. I could see it. You can see it. You can walk out there and look. I can get a handful of my soil, a handful of my neighbor's dirt, almost side by side, and it looked like it came from two different planets.
And what's that What's that process look like of management? What's the transformation from year one if you were to expand your property? Like I said, some of the stuff's been under your management for 6 years or 9 years. So what does year one look like, and what does that move towards from what are you planting? What are you doing? How are you grazing it? What's the management to get that to the pristine state?
I'll answer the second part of that question first. What we're talking about here is establishing vegetation, having a hard animal impact, and a long recovery time.
Okay.
I'm going to tell you how you do that in a minute, but that's what's important. And you know, if you think about it, and we use perennials, and I know you can do it with annuals, but I know more about the perennial side of it. But when I get that perennial stand of perennials established, and I fertilize it with compost or whatever I have to fertilize it with, I'm now on a 60-day grazing cycle. I wish it was 90, but it's not. It's 60. But when I put my herds out there, we really hammer it hard. A lot of impact. And then it's 60 days before they come back. You can just see that grass grow. And when you see the grass grow up here, those roots are growing underground just as much.
Mm-hmm.
And so it'll recover for 60 days. Again, 90 might be better. We put the animals out there, hard animal impact, a lot of manure, a lot of cloven hooves on that soil, top of the top soil. And then it recovers, and it's just beautiful. I mean, it's just beautiful what it does. And I took a shortcut. Well, I don't know if it's a shortcut or not. I chose to. Well, we've got about 3,200 acres on this home farm here, and it's divided up in about 150 something paddocks and about 3 herds. That varies a little bit, but we move them around and around, so we're not doing a lot of fence building. It's mostly just moving cattle and be sure the waters are good and the fences are good.
What are you planting for vegetation? What do you put in your seed mix? What do you try to add to it over time? What do you plant?
I'm a believer in the native species, but that's very expensive for me, and I just can't afford to do it.
Mm-hmm.
So I plant typically. Let's start with this. So when I get a new piece of ground, I will winter on it the first year. We're able to graze cattle about 10 months a year. 2 months a year we're dependent upon stored forage, hay, and I'll feed the animals. I mean, it looks terrible. I mean, we overgraze it. I feed the hay on the ground, which is wasteful. A lot of manure, a lot of urine, a lot of cloven hooves pushing that wasted hay into the soil, and it looks terrible when I get off of it. But then that spring, I'll plant a mixture of warm season annuals, whatever's cheap. I mean, the more the better, whatever's cheap at the seed store. But I always put Bahia grass in it. Bahia grass is not a native perennial, warm season perennial, but it's been here since the 50s, and it works really well, and it's really cheap. And I found that I can use it as the bridge to get over from nothing growing there to a lot of stuff growing there.
Mm-hmm.
So then we'll just start in the rotation. Of course, it's new. It's mostly annuals, not a lot of perennials. You got to time it a little bit differently, but it's in the rotation. Then I overseed every acre every year in the winter with a mixture of a cereal, rye or wheat or oats or whatever's cheap at the seed store, plus dicot radish, plus ryegrass, plus whatever clover is cheap at the seed store. And it's very important in this ecosystem to get that planted in October. I've got a 20-foot John Deere no-till grain drill, heavy grain drill, and we'll plant that 3,200 acres in October. We start right at the first, and we get through, but we work really hard to get over the land that month. When I overseed it, the next day I put the cows in and let them help walk it in a little bit. And then we'll usually about Thanksgiving or a little after, we'll shut the cows up. On the next one, we're going to try to fix. The next one, we're going to overgraze with animal impact to get it ready to go again.
So your perennial pastures are really a combination of annuals planted in them plus the existing perennials that come through.
I'm glad you asked that. Let me clarify that a little bit. I didn't do a good job. I'm about 80 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. We get 50-something inches of rain a year. Hot in the summer, and I think I've seen it snow 3 times in my life. We do a really good job with warm season perennials. They want to grow here. We do not do a good job with cool season perennials. If it's too hot for fescue, they just don't want to grow here. So for years I thought I was in a horrible place, but then we figured out that spending a bunch of money planting those cool season annuals really bridges us over well.
Yeah.
We don't feed hay but a couple of months a year. And I told you how we do it. We feed it in an area that we want to impact.
Mm-hmm. I had a bit of a chance to work with Bahia. I spent a summer down in Gulfport, Mississippi at a ranch just south of Wiggins, which is pretty much all Bahia grass pastures. And so, if some of our listeners, right, so in South Dakota and the West, they would be able to take those, look, Bahia grass actually looks a lot like big blue stem in a lot of ways. The trifoliate, everything that they're puts together in the seed head and everything is very similar. You can stockpile big blue stem, and it's got pretty fantastic palatability and protein and everything in the winter months. Bahia grass, not so much, right? So if you have extra Bahia grass, you can't leave a field of Bahia grass and let it go into winter and come in and graze it dormant and really expect anything to even be at maintenance. They'll lose weight even if they're not pregnant, lactating, or growing, right?
I give you my word they will. And it's what you said, and it's further compounded by the fact we get so much rain here. So when that plant's not like green and actively growing anymore, all that rain is just leaching whatever was good and water soluble in that plant out. So I hear people talk a lot about standing forages like that, and I respect it. I know I've been places where I've seen it work. My best friend is Gabe Brown up in North Dakota, and I've been to his place. But it is not the thing to do here.
Yep. Yeah.
Bahia grass takes a bad rap. Cattlemen down here in the South disdain Bahia grass, but I like it a lot. I think it's fine. I can get a couple of pounds a day gain anytime on it, and that's not great, but it's okay, and I can do it for a very long season.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And it's when I was very industrial, I hated Bahia grass. I wanted every acre to be a monoculture of Tifton 85 Bermuda grass.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I sprayed it with herbicides and fungicides and put 200 pounds of nitrogen out on it per acre. If something was going out there that wasn't Tifton 85 Bermuda grass, I got a herbicide and sprayed it. And I can't afford to do that. I can't afford to buy enough chemical fertilizer to grow Tifton 85 Bermuda grass, and don't even forget the fact that all that chemical fertilizer was burning up what little organic matter I might have had in my soil.
Yeah.
And forget the fact that all that fungicide and insecticide I was putting out there was taking out any beneficial. It's just on and on and on in that downward spiral.
So what would have been some of the native grasses in the coastal plains there that you do occasionally run across or see, or if you kind of upgraded in seed, what would they be?
I should know that, but I don't.
Oh, it's okay. That's fine.
I see it out there, but I haven't gone to the trouble of identifying. I know what cows will eat and what they won't eat.
Yep.
But I haven't gone to a lot of trouble to learn, what's out there and what's not out there.
No, I just, like I said, I was curious. I mean, Bahia grass is kind of like our brome grass. It's so pervasive that it really becomes, the dominant grass anytime that it's out there, unless, like I said, you're trying to actively get rid of it, which
And I'm not sure that my practice of planting Bahia grass is exactly what I ought to be doing. I've been doing it for a long time, and it works. But I do think that it does establish a dominance that prevents some other things from growing.
Yeah.
Gamma grass is one that you asked a question. I told you I didn't know, but I do know we see gamma grass, and it'll. I hate to say it can compete with Bahia grass, but it'll be one of the first things you see that's from way back when.
Yeah.
So it seems like the cattle herd is probably the main focus of livestock, but then you mentioned you've got 10 other species of livestock. Can you talk through the management of all of those as you're grazing and the incorporation of them all, or what those others are?
Yeah, we raise cows, hogs, sheep, goats, rabbits. Rabbits is small. And chickens, turkeys, geese, guineas, and ducks. And everything's outside. The only thing that's raised inside is the birds when we're first brooding them. We buy 1-day olds, and it takes 3 weeks or so to brood them. Then we put them out on the pasture. And we've had to figure that out. When I first embraced I had a monoculture cattle and started moving them and seeing the improvement, and I really liked it, and I started adding other species, and I wanted to move those other species right behind my cattle. And I did that for a while, and I just about ran off all the good help I had because cows don't move the same speed as hogs and chickens and sheep. I tell people, how they had those huge cattle drives across the West. They didn't have huge chicken drives, a huge hog drive.
No.
There's a reason for that. So we've learned how to manage that. And everything is rotated, but it's rotated at a speed that fits the animal. And mostly that has to do with watching the land and seeing what it needs. I mean, we move cattle every day. Hogs, it varies. I mean, you have to look at the land and see that when they're starting to over-impact it, or maybe just a little before they start over-impacting it, move them to another place. And there's a lot of management in that, the same with the chickens. And people want you to give them a schedule, and then I can't give them a schedule. A 50-pound pig's impact on the land is not the same as a 220-pound pig's impact on the land. The impact on the land when it hadn't rained for a week is not the same as if it rained an inch every day that week. So I think one of the enemies to this kind of animal husbandry is how hands-on you have to be in making those decisions. We make I don't do it all anymore. I used to. I'll tell you more about the structure in a minute. But so many decisions are made on this farm every day. And some days we make the decision that's adverse to the land because the animals need it. Mm-hmm. And some days we make a decision that's adverse to the animals because the land needs it. And it's just very, very complex. Mm-hmm. And I think that the reason they quit teaching it in land-grant universities is it's hard to teach. You can become an expert soils professor and know everything there is to know about soils and not know a darn thing about animal diseases or plant species or. And this kind of animal husbandry requires a farmer that knows a little bit about everything, and it's almost not in your best interest to know too much about one thing, because it'll start to impact your decision.
That makes
sense. How did you come to the decision of adding livestock species? Was it because you saw the opportunity on the marketing side with the meat business, or was it because you saw the opportunity to increase productivity on pasture or be more efficient with your grazing strategies? Or
that's kind of like one of what came first, chicken and egg questions there. But I think the first species I added was sheep, and I added sheep because I had a lot of species in my pasture. My pasture was getting more diverse, and there were things the cows just didn't seem to have an appetite for. I could starve them into eating it, but they didn't want it. I tried a few sheep, and I liked it a lot. And then I decided to get a few goats, and then we got hogs, and it's become more what you said. I consider all these species to be cures for certain things I don't like. So I see something going on in my pastures I don't like. I prescribe a different species for it. And again, I told you I used to just move them. Now we do it very prescriptively. So I say I'll go by, see something growing in the woods. I say, woo, this needs goats.
Yep.
So we'll put the goats out there. And the same
What a mind switch. Thinking through of, you talked about you used to walk through your pastures and see something to kill. Now you walk through your pastures and you see an opportunity to profit from it, expand your business from it.
I don't want to get caught out saying this, but I think I'm being honest and truthful when I say this, that I used to look for something to kill all the time. I mentioned that earlier. I went to the pasture looking for something to kill, and I was good at finding it, and I knew what to kill it with. Now, I really don't want to kill anything. Now, you might have an invasive non-native species that shows up. That's an extraordinary situation. I've had those happen before. But generally, I believe that every creature in my pasture has a role. Now, I may not be smart enough to know what it is. Like dung beetles, we know what the role is. There are a number of things out there that we know. We understand the benefit they're giving us. But the things that, I don't know, gnats and mosquitoes, I don't exactly know what good they do, but I believe there's something. I mean, I'm not telling you I won't kill a gnat or a mosquito. I'm not telling you that. But if I had it in my power to drive them into extinction, I wouldn't do it.
Because something would happen.
Yes. Yeah, that's it. Yeah.
Some piece of it would be missing. Yeah.
Yeah. Nature in control is best, and we're usually in its way of trying to screw it up.
Mm-hmm.
So
we got army worms right now. I got good grass, it's pretty, it's big, and man, we've had a moth flight, and army worms are out there, and I still remember, how much lanate to put and how much pyrethrum. I still remember all those things, but I look out across there and I see the cattle egrets is just white out there, and I say, well, I'll go somewhere else. I won't sit here and watch those worms eat.
Yeah. On a related topic, I mean, this is we'll get back to more questions for you, Will, but I noticed this last 2 weeks, Justin. I was trying to figure out, we've had just a terrible bull thistle problem in a lot of places up here, right? And so we've got some of the neighbors' pastures, and they like to keep it sprayed up, and then some of ours, which we hardly ever do any spray, a little bit of spot spraying once in a great while. And I noticed that about 3 years ago, we had a contractor come through and do a lot of spraying. So, Will, in this part of the world, you can not spray your pastures ever. They'll get a little weedy. It's really never get out of hand. There's no brush. It's native grass, so it likes to stay grass. So you don't have to control any brush or anything like that. So you can spray if you like to see them clean. You don't have to spray if you don't want to. Every field that got sprayed 3 years ago with Grazon had a massive bull thistle infestation everywhere. And hardly anything else out there. But the bull thistle was the first to show up. Every one of the pastures that did not get sprayed has hardly any bull or musk thistles, but lots of goldenrod, right? Lots of these other forbs, which aren't that bad, right? Cattle will browse on them. So it's almost, I was trying to figure out what the pattern was. It's like, man, you get in that cycle, and now you've got to go out and spray again because the thistles are bad enough. And then 3 years later, they're going to be a bigger vacuum with less forbs, and there's going to be needing something, and that's going to be the first forbs that can come in and break through the layer of herbicide residual, so that they're going to be there, and you're going to keep everything else back, and you're going to eliminate all the mild problems to have one big problem.
That's well done. No, that was a great description. And I see these things, and sometimes I don't know why it happened, but I can see that it happened.
Yeah, I mean, I'm telling you, like I can tell you 10 to 15 different pieces that I know were sprayed 3 to 4 years ago, and 10 to 15 that weren't. And it is to the line, it is to the pasture of what's going on with the thistle infestation.
These sides that we use kill a lot of different things. They don't just it kills. They do a great job on the target.
Yeah.
But they kill non-target species. Yes. When those species out there they have a purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we had another neighbor too. I mean, that was asking me. We've got leafy spurge, which is another of those bad ones. It's not as bad as a bull thistle, but it's pretty invasive. And we had finally got this one piece fenced for sheep, right? So we had cattle out there forever, rotating through, and finally got it fenced right so we could graze sheep out there with too. And 2 of the lines on the state highway. And the next year, neighbor came over and said, after watching this for a year and a half, came over and said, "What did you spray out there? I don't know what you sprayed, but I've been trying to spray everything to get my leafy spurge." And I said, I cringe and I go by because it's right to the fence line, and yours is completely gone. I don't see it, and it's just as bad as ever on my place. I didn't spray anything. I just got more sheep. I just added 25 head of sheep out there to the cattle and didn't change the stocking rate on the cattle and rotated the sheep in after the cattle, and that was it. And he goes, "Huh." I mean, it was just, and so now he's been trying to figure out how he's going to get sheep. But like you said, we've been exporting the talent, exporting the people out of this country for years because we've told all the young people, we don't need you, go somewhere else, go find something different. And now in order to make the changes that need to be made, it's less about machinery and it's less about inputs, but it's more about labor and management and minds. And we got rid of them all. We told them to leave.
Yeah, and I've done some things right, and I've done some things wrong too. I'll tell you a story on myself. I bought a farm that had planted pines on it.
Yeah.
And I despise monocultural pine plantations. It's against nature. But when I do buy these places, I don't just clear cut it. I just over thin them. I say over thin them as if you were a timber guy, you would cringe at how much thinning I do, but I leave a lot of them.
Yep.
And my timber guy, my logger didn't come when I thought he ought to come, so I decided I would use hogs to thin them. Hogs will kill trees. Mm-hmm. So I put the hogs in there, and I was going to leave them in there exactly the right time to kill out what I didn't want, and I was watching them very close, and it didn't work well at all. They went from none of them die till they all die. One went, I mean, it's just, I couldn't gradually.
Yeah. Thin it.
That was a bad experiment. Note to self, don't do that no more.
Yeah.
I got my logger in there, and we thinned it down like I wanted them. He cut the ones that I put orange paint on. The hogs didn't paint with the orange paint much attention.
So those pine plantations, that was, I believe that was a government CRP program. I'm sure they get raised commercially too, but most of them go in a kind of a government CRP program down there, and they stay in that program for X amount of years. When it comes out, they go into the pulp timber industry. Is that correct, Will? Is that my understanding of it?
Well, yes, everything says exactly right. But what they do is they thin them for pulp.
Okay.
They'll thin them again for chip and saw. Then they'll cut big salt to them right out. So there's 3 stages of harvest, and ultimately you wind up with a clean cut stump, strong parcel that you can start back over with.
So then they go out, dig out, burn out, do something with the stumps, and plant them back. Is that right?
Yeah, well, sometimes they plant between the rows of stumps. There's a lot of different things. I got some. When I thin these monocultural stands, like I just told you, I don't stump it. I leave the stumps out there. I think those stumps offer great water percolation when they rot out.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. So do you have mostly treeless? Do you have? I mean, it's savanna, but do you have clumps of trees and then pasture plains, or do you have intermittent silvopasture type paddocks where you've got standing trees, but 80 to 120 feet apart, so they're not shading things out. What's the landscape look like usually?
Yeah, I don't have nearly as many trees as I wish I had.
Yeah.
My dad and I thought the only good tree was one that was pushed over with a D8, and we pushed. We over cleaned the land. They made big fields out of it.
Mm-hmm.
The hardwood bottoms, or the main forest that was left, or the planted pines, as I just described to you. I have planted a lot of trees. Planting trees is planting trees is not expensive. Protecting the trees from the livestock is very, very expensive. But I've planted a lot of trees, and what I do is I told you I've got it cross-fenced. We probably got 160 miles of fence on the farm. And I get over like 12 feet from it and build another fence and plant my trees along it. Mm-hmm. And that's expensive, but I do some of it every year.
Okay.
And I wish I had more than I have, but we do plant a lot of trees.
Yeah. What trees do you like? What trees do you normally plant that kind of fit within the system well?
That's a good question. So white oak, this is white oak pastures.
Right.
And
that makes
I
sense.
plant a lot of white oaks, but white oaks are very, very, very slow growing. We plant green ash, and they do really well, but they tell me that they're subject to disease, although I hadn't had much disease. We plant pecans, because I like pecans. This year, I'm not real proud of this, but this year I planted a good many paulownia trees, which is an Australian import.
Okay.
They're the ones that are not supposed to be invasive. I hope they're not. But I needed a quick shade along a long alleyway I built. So I got on the south side of it and planted those paulownia trees. I may not do any more of that, but they are growing fast. They are taking off. So, I think that native species are great. That some of them are so slow growing that it's just hard to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, my champion tree is a white oak.
Okay.
When I plant a white oak, I'm not doing it for my children. I'm doing it for my grandchildren. I mean, it's so slow.
Yeah.
So you have a couple hundred people that work at your farm, between the processing plant and the store, and
I think it's about 170 right now.
Yeah.
Payroll's $100,000 every Friday. I can tell you.
Yeah, that's that number will sting. How do you find people? How do you? I mean, you're a small community
Bluffton,
in a rural area. How do you find people that want to be a part of the team? How do you get them trained? How do you get them to believe in the system? And how's that work?
We got 170 people, and there's 110 people in town. So, and a lot of them are old people that aren't able to work. So, housing is an issue. Well, first of all, this is the poorest county in America. Clay County, Georgia, is literally in 2020 was the poorest county in the United States. We're the largest employer in the county, so we pay. I like to think we pay a little more than most folks, and I hope we do. I wish I could pay more. I can't afford to, but we do. I think we do. I think we're better than most. But and a lot of my people are local, and they're here because they want a job that they can depend on. It'll pay them every Friday, and that's fine. More recently, we've got another kind of employee that are young people that come here to learn how to do what we do.
Sure.
And these are really stellar people. We love them. We know when they get here, they're not going to stay a long time, and it's all right. It's fine. I may ask you how long you're going to stay so I know how to manage it. But we don't begrudge people coming and going. We've got an intern program. We bring in 6 interns 4 times a year for 3 months. And we keep a lot of those people. And we get 20 plus applications for 6 openings, so we can be pretty selective. And a lot of them come here and go. That's their intention. But a lot of them come here and stay, and that's real good. what we pay people is not something I'm super proud of. We pay all I can. You know, the business the business does not make a lot of money. If I went up, I said, okay, we're going to pay everybody gets a 10% raise. I couldn't pay it.
Mm-hmm.
But the employee side of it is the part of the business I enjoy most. And we have these wonderful people that come here, thirsty for knowledge, that really want to learn. They're not all like that. Some of them are just good people that want a reliable place to work where they'll be treated fairly.
Yeah.
So we try to satisfy both of them. We also started a nonprofit, a 501c3 called CFAR, Center for Agricultural Regeneration. And we do training through the CFAR program. And some of those people wind up here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At what point in your career on the farm did you start to, well, maybe I'm asking this. What part came first? Was it you bringing in the next generation, or was it you expanding all of the different offerings from the farm? Like, were you developing these new markets with chickens and honey and, all the things that you offer now, or was it you bringing in, maybe it was your kids or that next generation that then expanded it?
No, it was definitely I had, my wife and I had 3 daughters, and good girls, but they never were farm kids. I mean, they were raised on the farm, but my daughters played basketball and piano and went to dancing lessons and softball, whatever. They were not, they did not go with me on the farm the way I grew up. I never wanted to do anything but run the farm. I never wanted to do anything but work on the farm. I went with my dad, and my children were not like that. And I decided early on that they wouldn't come back, and didn't expect them to. Unrelated to that, I made up my mind I wanted to work the farm differently, and started doing that. And I wasn't smart enough to really think much about an exit strategy. I just wanted to do it different. I was 40 years old. I wasn't worried about exit. I was working. So, but what happened is my daughters, 2 of the 3 daughters, liked it and decided to come back. And I wouldn't let them come back. I made them go work somewhere else for a year. And we had a rule, and they did. They worked off the farm, and then they came back, and their spouses came with them. And it's a really good relationship.
I mean, this is all hypothetical, but do you think that they would have had the same interest in coming back if you were a more, the pathway that you were on, a conventional, kind of linear type system?
I would bet you anything they would not. I got one son-in-law that might have been attracted to that, maybe, but they didn't come up working in it, appreciating it. It wasn't their idea of a good way to make a living, and they would not come back.
Yeah.
Well, I think that the amount of creativity that this offers versus the latter, right? Like, they could have came back and they could have been an agronomist for you. They could have wrote scripts for, spraying and fertilizer. You could have had somebody do your marketing plan for selling your calves and, doing your hedging for you. But now they can come back and you got people involved in the marketing side and creating the storefront and all of the different product lines that you have, and seeing through on the slaughter facility and what that can all do, and making sure that you're utilizing everything. I mean, there are so many different layers within that system that makes it a little bit more fun.
Yeah, that's a good point. And with both my children and the 2 in-laws that came back, when they came back, there wasn't just a real good place to stick them. I mean, everything was already running. We were already doing things, so they had to come back and sort of find a place. And with all 4 of them, it took a little while for them to find a place. They did whatever they had to do, whatever the next task was, until they found or created a business to run, and now they run it. They have very distinct roles. They have areas of the farm that they are responsible for the financial performance. They're responsible for hiring and firing. And of course, we have to all work together. I mean, we got, we got one bank account, and we have a meeting every Friday. We just had it today, and we sit and go over the financials and go over whatever's happened that week that's right and what's not right, what we should have done different, and what we should do more of. And it's a lot of fun. Now, I keep saying it's a lot of fun. And I should tell you that we got about $10 million in debt. We got about $30 million in assets. And the business is very break-evenish. By any modern business standard, I talk to my friends who are CPAs and MBAs, and they say, why would you do that? And the fact is, I wish it was different. I wish there was more profit in it, but it's okay. And I think the main difference is their methods of measuring success and profitability are based on the monthly report, the quarterly report, the annual report, and they're all real good at that, and the procedures that you go through, and the auditors understand it. And I think here, even though we run a very break-even-ish business with a very low return on investment, I think we're building long-term wealth.
Yeah.
We think of it generationally. When we talk about making an expenditure, we talk about whether or not we can afford to do it on a weekly, monthly, annual basis. But the impact, the return, we're thinking about generationally.
Yeah. I think I don't know what number. Justin, do you know what number podcast this is? I can't remember where we're at. We've been
70s.
Several years in this 70s. Okay. Anyway, so our second podcast was with Luke Perman, and I remember we were having this conversation about that, and we were postulating. It's like, well, what if ranching is just at best a break-even business that's highly associated with the really lucrative side gig of long-term land ownership that's been enormously, effective at building wealth, right? I mean, that's what it is. It's maybe this is the side business that it just is associated with holding the land together for a really long period of time, which has been an astounding return on investment if you ever had to liquidate.
I think you just described it. I think you just nailed it. But it's interesting. We bought. I inherited about 1,000 acres of land. I bought about 1,000 acres of land. I want to buy some more, but I don't think my business is profitable enough to do it. When I buy land, I know that land is not going to cash flow. I got to be making enough money over here on this other to make my payments. And it's because land, the wealth building you referred to, is because we do that and we pay for it in 15 or 20 years, whatever we have to. But land lasts forever. I mean, it's a non-depreciating asset. The non-depreciating asset. You got precious gems, precious metal, maybe art. I don't know anything about art, but land. Those are not. There may be some others. Those are only non-depreciating assets I know of.
Yeah.
But when we go to buy land, you go to the bank and you say, yeah, well, we can do that. We'll set this up for 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, you buying something that'll last forever and paying for it in 20 years. That may not be a good deal. It may take 30 or 40. But if it lasts forever, it's...
Yeah. I mean, they'll let you do a 200-year mortgage in Switzerland on a house.
Really?
Yeah. I think there's a few examples of it longer than that, but an 80 to 100-year mortgage is not unheard of.
I had no idea.
The country's been peaceful for 500 years, and the houses last for 200-300 years. So why wouldn't you have a 100-year mortgage? No one ever pays them off. It just becomes a perpetual payment. I don't say it's a good idea, but yeah. I mean, really, like I said, it's the land, but really you're buying. It's not airspace. You're buying a chunk of the surface of the earth that gets sunlight on an average 12 days out of the year, or 12 hours out of the year. That's what you're buying, right? You're buying an energy source. You're buying land, but you're buying your square of an energy source that you get to utilize of perpetual free energy and water. Yeah.
And water.
Yeah. Water. Yeah. So yeah, it's, you think about it that way. It's land, but really it's access to water and energy.
Well, and really it's more than that, and it's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
If it's a live piece of ground, then it's an ecosystem that's generating, and it's spinning off a return.
Yeah.
When an ecosystem is operating optimally,
Yeah.
it spins off a return. You know, all that coal and oil and gas in the ground that we've been burning for the last 80 years, that was the bounty of nature
Yeah.
in the era of the dinosaur. And
Yeah.
the land, if the cycles of nature are operating optimally, it's producing a bounty today. It ain't coal and oil and gas, it's carrots and peanuts and sweet potatoes, or cows.
Yeah. Well, so I think that the interest, like you mentioned, the internship program and other things, the interest that is abounding out there for folks to get into more of a cyclical, diversified land use system. And again, I think there's a lot of misnomers on whether or not it's profitable, because I think there's a lot of people hung up. It's like, yep, you can just jump in and do this, and don't recommend, just not going into it without a plan B and some extra income and things like that. But I think that there's some operations out there that would be able to attract the interest of their next generations if they took a little different view on how they did things and what they were doing and what the opportunities were. And when you think about the continuity of an operation or the length of a business, for what you just said there, it's like, for the most part, you're pretty sure your next generation would not be interested in the operation, but they are because of the system that you've done. There's no way to quantify the value of that, right? Because that means that you have multiple more generations of this long-term land ownership and continuity of the operation.
Yeah, I don't know exactly what's going to happen with that deal. We have, I told you, we got way more applicants than we got slots for interns, a lot of enthusiasm. And I don't want to be guilty of talking anybody out of pursuing this. In fact, I want to be a recruiter.
Mm-hmm.
But I also don't want to trick anybody.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of interns that come here with the hope that they can go find them some land somewhere and farm it and raise a family and live well. And I don't know if they will or not.
Yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult.
Very difficult. Yeah.
And if you do, you better find a spouse that's going to want to do it with you. And then there's high likelihood that those children that you and your spouse raised, probably on welfare, are going to want to do something else. Mm-hmm. So it's this secession deal is very difficult in these tight economic boundaries that we operate in.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to hear that, but it needs to be said out loud.
Needs to be said.
That is refreshing to hear. I mean, that is super realistic. It's practical, and I don't think there's a lot of folks in the regenerative space that are also mentioning that part of this, because that's real.
I see, and so when I came from a uber industrial cattleman, monocultural cattleman, to doing this, it never occurred to me to step back in terms of volume. I'd come up with the idea that this is what you need, and if your neighbor goes out of business, you need to pick that up. I came to it with that mindset, and that's what I did. And then on top of that, I borrowed a bunch of money and built a processing plant. So I needed even more. It added species, so I needed even more. And a number of the people that did what I did when I did it didn't survive. They'd gone out of business. I could name them, but I'm not going to. But it didn't work for them. I was lucky enough it has worked for me so far. Now, there aren't many people that operate, not that we're that big, but there aren't that many entities in this country that operate on the scale we are, 100 and something employees. It's either very small or industrial. And I think that may be right. I think that may be the right way to do it. But you've got 3 legs on the stool. This is very important. You've got the production out there in the field or in the pasture is one leg. You got processing, which in my case is slaughter. In some cases it might be some different eggs or whatever. And then you got marketing. And it doesn't matter how long those legs on that stool are. You got to keep them the same length. It can be a very small operation or a pretty big operation. But if you can't keep those 3 facets of the operation at the same scale, then you got a problem, and it's hard to do.
Yeah. So, what about the scalability? What about the progress? What about the movable middle? Right. I think that's where Justin and I, have spent most of our, last decade or more of our careers is working with the folks that are making small movements towards diversification, small movements towards multiple species of livestock and more grazing or more time on grass, right? They move from, selling calves and put them in the feed yard right away to grass yearlings. And so they get another 30-40% of the life cycle on grass. We've seen a lot more by far folks making an incremental change towards that than we have success of overnight transition into, yep, I went to a conference, I came back home, I cleaned out the shelves, I sold everything I started, and which no one says to do, right? But everybody has this moment where they feel like that's what they're going to do. Sure. Do you get to see and be a part of that? Because and I'll give some examples of that, but do you get to interact with those folks much? I mean, do you feel that small movement or incremental change nationwide?
Well, I live in Bluffton, Georgia.
Yeah,
I don't travel nationwide, so I don't know what's going on out there. But I will say that what you're advocating there is the way it needs to be. The idea of going grand scale is very, very hard. Now, you will wind up with the problem of, okay, who's going to build the slaughter plant? Somebody got to build a slaughter plant.
Yep.
And I think it would be better if I think that the chances of surviving would be much higher if it weren't the farmer building the slaughter plant. I think it'd be better if somebody in that business build a plant and serve the farmers. But boy, it's hard to get all that volume
that put together,
coordinated. It really is. I've seen a lot of people not perform very well financially, because of that. It was not they weren't doing a good job. It's just a lot of coordination in that.
Yeah. I think in the land use side is what Justin and I see. I've seen this tremendous progress on the direct marketing to consumer marketing. I'm with you. I've unfortunately seen a higher percentage of those fail within 5 years than I have them succeed, and I don't know exactly how that gets fixed either.
Well, you got to get that. You got to get that production, processing, and marketing thing
dialed in.
You about can't operate too small. You can get that happening. You can probably operate too big, but
right.
On the downside, if you can get that balanced, you probably be okay.
Yeah.
I think history will tell, but I am still surprised that there hasn't been more collaboration with people that have started this and then somehow found a way to expand it through other people. Like the seed stock producers, they're able to have other herds raise seed stock for them and be what's that word?
Cooperators.
cooperator herds, right?
yeah,
And
feeder system, yeah.
like I'm surprised that there hasn't been other brands expand by pulling their model through other producers.
So Nyman
People,
Ranch would be one example of someone
yeah,
that's
there
kind
are
of done that
some, but
moderately successful. Yeah, but not
yeah,
many. And the
not
ones that
many.
I can think of, were about the same ones that were doing it 10 years ago too. You know what I mean?
It's pretty hard.
Yeah.
It's just pretty hard. I got a producer group that I work with, and they're my friends and neighbors and relatives, and I love them, but it's hard. I mean,
Yeah.
when cows as high as they are now, it's just so
Yeah.
hard for them not to take them to stockyard.
Just take them to stockyard, yeah. Yeah. Huh. Well, we've seen, I think that there's promise out there. I mean, the organizations that Justin and I work with outside of our individual farms and ranches, Millborn Seeds, Renovo, and AgSpire, I think, Justin, you guys are on track to sell almost 5 million acres of cover crop seed this year across the nation. It's 5 times higher than it was, 6-7 years ago. Several 100,000 acres of perennial seedings that has been grown at a good clip. AgSpire is just 3.5 years old. We now have almost 500 producers in our network that are making those incremental changes, doing their first cover cropping, their first perennial restoration, edge of field practices, rotational grazing systems. So it's I feel like there's what you're doing, Will, and your message is igniting a passion in a lot of folks. And you're seeing those folks coming to your meetings and to your events, but we're seeing a lot of it, folks that maybe may never get a chance to meet you, may never buy your book or know exactly, but the message is resonating, and it's turning into a movement. It really is.
Well, that's great. That's great. I'm glad. I'm surrounded by large industrial farmers. They're good people. They're wonderful people. I don't like the way they manage their land, but
right.
They think they're doing right, and they think I'm not right, and it's all right. But these are people that raise cotton, corn, and peanuts, and they own a percentage of the local cotton gin.
Yeah.
And they own a percentage of the local grain elevator. And they own a percentage of the local peanut buying, maybe shelling plant. So they are economically, financially committed to the industrial production model. And they can't just say, I think I'll do this thing way different.
Yeah.
They're invested. Not forget the fact they got $2-3 million worth of equipment that is very specific for cotton or peanuts or grain.
Yeah.
They've got secondary investments in the next step in the chain. So, and these are good people. They're good producers. They're not newbies. They're good at it. They're paying their bills. They're not getting a good return on investment. Guess who else ain't getting a good return on the investment?
Yeah. Unfortunately, the systems probably aren't drastically different when it comes to that. It comes more about representation of values and what you want to do. But like I said, I think that there's an inherent, if you want to put a dollar figure to this, because everybody wants to say, put it as a business, a dollar figure. If this is was a way to increase the continuity generationally in your operation, that is an invaluable asset that try to put a number on that, right? That's a difficult part of it, but we've all been taught, right? Whether you went to University of Georgia in the 1970s or South Dakota State University in the early 2000s or wherever you're at today, you all been taught how to do a 1-year balance sheet to show, okay, on January 1, hit go. By December 31st, how far did you get? How much money did you put in the bank? And it's relatively true and difficult to compete with when it comes to long-term planning and things like that. But
you're exactly right. It's been in place so long that it's entrenched.
And it's been difficult. One of the things that I've seen more of a thread lately, and I love that Ray Archuleta was adamant about getting livestock grazing or livestock on the land as the 5th principle of soil health, which wasn't there for a long time. I've been to a lot of conferences where a lot of early soil health leaders, right, the folks that have been 30-year no-till, doing cover crops for decades, many of them haven't had a 4-legged animal on their property in years and years and years, and they know it. They need it. They know that they're missing that. They can tell. but every fence is gone, every waterer's gone, the chute's gone, the loadouts, every single piece of infrastructure that you need to bring some of those four-legged animals back is not there. And it's spendy to bring it back if you let it all go.
And knowing what to do with them.
Yeah, much less that. Or have the people around. Because if you're no-tilling, a grain farmer, you can cover a lot of acres with a couple folks.
Yep.
Yeah. That's back to my comment before, is like there's a lot of places that don't have near enough cows, mainly none, that could use them.
Well, I was born in 1954, and this thing started changing in the end of World War II. Well, it really dramatically started in World War II. So as a kid, I still remember a lot of the older farming, and you had a lot of people that had, a few cows and a few hogs.
Mm-hmm.
And a few sheep or goats, and raised some peanuts and cotton and corn. But that really separated. You became a farmer, or you became a stockman, and not many. And there's this is probably not something to get into, but the mindset of a farmer and the mindset of a stockman are quite different. I've known a lot of farmers and a lot of stockmen. I have not known many people that are good at both of them. You're either one way or you're the other way.
Yeah.
Linear or cyclical.
Right. Yeah. Well, and when I look around and I realize that most of the people in my area, some of the largest and probably nicest built houses around here were still built in the 1920s, back when they had diversified systems. And you say, well, you can't make that work anymore, or that didn't work. And I'm going, in our rural areas, some of the most impressive buildings and impressive houses and impressive barns were all built 100 years ago when that system was there. And not saying that you can repeat it today and do it the same way, but I don't know. In 30 years, they went from sod huts to, 2-story houses with a nice covered front porch. That's not too bad. It takes me longer to do that today.
Well, margins are getting tighter and tighter. And if you look at when my great-grandfather and grandfather were slaughtering on the farm and bringing it to Bluffton, they got 100 cents of every food dollar.
Mm-hmm.
And then my dad and I industrialized, and we got down to, 15 cents of every food dollar, or whatever you want to look at. And now we changed, and we're back up to getting, if I sell it online, 100 cents of every dollar again.
Yeah.
But then the expenses are incredible, but it's okay because I'm spending that money here. I'm not sending it to some distant city. All the revenue stays pretty much local.
Yep. No, that's very good. Well, I really appreciate you being able to join us today. Any parting words for our audience, or anything that we didn't get a chance to cover that you'd like to discuss?
I think you folks did a really good job. If there's anything else I don't know what it is. So, thank y'all for having me on. I enjoyed it.
I encourage everybody to check out Will's book, A Bold Return to Giving a Damn, and check out the website and some of those studies, which I think are really impactful. And Justin and I will talk a little bit. We might get a little seed mix put together, some cover crops, some winter annual cover crop to get you planted this fall here, and send you a little gift package here coming up soon here. So it'll be even cheaper than the cheap stuff at the seed store. So
there we go.
That'd be great, and let me invite you to come see us. We got lodging here on the farm. We got a restaurant, and we got a store, and I'd be glad to have you as my guest if y'all want to come down here and see us.
Sounds good. Thank you, Will.
Will. Thanks for your time.
Well, we hope you enjoyed another episode of the Roots and Ruminants podcast. Let us know what you thought of it. You can follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, all those social media things. And, if you ever have any questions, just give us a call. We've got a toll-free number here at 888-498-7333. Be glad to hear from you. Thank you.